Hello, and welcome to today's Beyond the Sea webinar. My name is Ashley Cuffia, Consumer Health Coordinator for the Southeastern Atlantic Regional Medical Library. Before we begin with today's guest speakers, there are a few administrative things I'm going to run by with you. We have a couple of questions listed from the presenter on the screen. As you are sharing, communicating, and asking questions in the chat box, please be sure to send to all attendees so that I, our guest presenters, and your colleagues can see your questions and information shared. If you need closed captioning for today's webinar, a link has been posted in the chat box. Today, our guest speakers are Anna Crampel and Carol Ann Lee Curry. Anna Crampel serves as the Head of Public Services at the Mercer University Skelton Medical Library in Macon, Georgia. She is a member of the Georgia Health Science Library Association and currently serves as Secretary. She is also a member of the Southern Chapter of the Medical Library Association and the Medical Library Association. Her research interests include evidence-based medicine, telehealth, telemedicine, literature searching, and scholarly communications. Carol Ann Lee Curry works at the Mercer University Skelton Medical Library in Macon, Georgia, as the reference and outreach librarian. She is an active member of the Georgia Health Science Library Association, currently serving as the Continuing Education Chair, is an active member of the Southern Chapter of the Medical Library Association, currently serving on the Public Relations and Membership Committee, serves on the MLA Book Panel, and also serves on the National Network of Libraries of Medicine, Southeastern Atlantic Region's Medical Library Program Advisory Committee. Her research interests include evidence-based medicine, searching the medical literature, scholarly communications, health information literacy, and consumer health outreach. Everyone, please welcome Anna and Carol Ann.
All right, so thank you, Ashley. So as Ashley noted, Anna and I'm Carol Ann, and Anna and I both are actually colleagues at the Mercer University School of Medicine here in Macon. So both of us are reference librarians, and this topic kind of comes up rather frequently for us, both when we're dealing with faculty as well as students. So it's an issue that we feel strongly about. So just before we get started, I just want to note that while we were waiting for the session to begin, we had posed a couple of questions to you on the first slide. The first question was, is everything in PubMed peer-reviewed? And the second question is, how do you evaluate the quality of citations that you come across in PubMed? So during today's session, we are going to address both of these. We thank you. Some people have already put some of their responses in the chat box, so we thank you for that. But we are definitely going to cover those, so just bear with us as we make our way through the slides. So today, we're going to discuss how to gauge the quality of open access articles in NLM databases, and specifically, we're going to review the NIH public access policy and highlight how it relates to OA publishing. We're going to explore the relationship between Medline, PubMed, and PubMed Central and discuss the implications of questionable citations from potentially predatory journals in PubMed search results. After I get done talking to you, Anna is going to do some live searching in the PubMed resource so you can see exactly just how prevalent this issue of questionable journals in PubMed is. And by the end of today's presentation, we hope that you're going to be able to identify journals that have been indexed for Medline, as well as how to recognize and distinguish between the Medline, PubMed, PubMed Central resources. And we also, at the very end of the slides, we're going to throw up on the screen a few resources and tools that we use here at Mercer a lot whenever we're, you know, trying to gauge the quality and help facilitate scholarly publishing in reputable databases. So today's session is not going to be really in-depth about, you know, what is open access, but you know, our focus is going to be on distinguishing between the various NLM resources and how open access publishing has impacted searching in those databases. But since this does involve the implications around the OA model, we do briefly have to kind of discuss just the basics of open access and how it is different from the traditional scholarly publishing journal model. So we're also going to explore how that OA model contributes to the problem of questionable journals. So just really quick, I'm going to take you way back. I'm going to, beginning as far back as the 17th century, academic journals emerged as a way for individuals to report discoveries in arts and sciences. By the late 18th century, general medical journals had become popular, and subject-specific medical journals were introduced in the early 20th century. By the 1990s, the traditional scholarly journal pricing began to climb, making researchers more reliant upon library affiliations to gain access to scholarly articles. It's worth noting that many of these early journals are still around today. However, several of them have had to make some modifications to allow for online access to their content. So with the traditional commercial-based or the commercial subscription-based model, publishers, they require readers to pay for the content that they read. And this has pretty much been the model followed by the academic publishing industry. Paid subscription models were established before the advent of the internet and before the introduction of open access. And these paid subscription models were implemented to support the various services required to produce peer-reviewed articles. And with the emergence of the internet and scholarly publishing, so many areas, and with so many other areas in business and society, radical transformation happened, when the internet gained so much popularity. So mainstream publishers of traditional subscription journals started publishing parallel electronic versions of their journals around the year 2000. So that's just a little bit of some background about the traditional publishing model. For open access, the rise of open access publishing, what it did was it challenged the long-standing model developed in concert by commercial publishers and medical organizations. And again, this model was mainly profitability was the model, and it depended on the availability, it depended on the ability for these publishers to restrict and sell access to medical information. So the definition that there's two popular definitions of what open access publishing is. Harvard scholar Peter Stuber defines open access literature as digital, online, free of charge, and free of most copyright and licensing restrictions. This is made possible by the article being made freely available on the internet and with the consent of the author or copyright holder. Another definition that you'll see that's popular is the Public Library of Online Science, or PLOS, and they define OA as unrestricted access and unrestricted use. So keep both of those definitions in mind today as we're going through the slides, because that really is how Anna and I generally define open access. So the rise of open access publishing has brought with it many advantages, including faster publication, enhanced visibility, and impact of one research. However, along with its benefits, this publishing model has also seen significant abuses. The issues of what constitutes reliable and scholarly from low quality or potentially predatory and fraudulent really does grow more complicated every day. And this is just a quick side-by-side of the differences between the two models. You'll see here with the traditional model, most publishing companies allow authors to publish their work for free. There may be a small fee. Typically, those fees are more for to cover the cost of printing, typically color printing or images. With the traditional publishing model, publishers generate their revenue by charging user-based subscription fees to either libraries or individuals, or they can charge a pay-per-view fee per article for those that don't have access. With the open access models, users can access the material for free. However, that does not mean that the concept of open access is free. The reason that articles are available to readers for free is because the cost of publishing was passed along at some point elsewhere, and that typically is to the author through what is known as article publishing charges, or APCs. So just keep in mind, while OA literature is not free to produce, it is generally less expensive than the traditional model. So, and one thing that is different than with open access and traditional models is typically open access gives the copyright to the author, which allows authors to reuse their work and disseminate it to other scholars. And it is worth noting that there are some open access publishers that don't charge fees. So usually I've noticed that typically happens when maybe an open access journal is starting up and they want to drive submissions. So compared to print journals, electronic journals typically have lower publishing costs and they allow for expanded access to the scholarly research. However, open access publishing does introduce an added cost of evaluating the ever-growing number of published online journals. So that's going to lead me to the NIH public access policy. Let's say the concept of open access is just really convoluted. Maybe you or one of your faculty members, maybe they just want to avoid open access completely. They want to keep publishing in a traditional journal. Maybe they don't have a few extra $1,000 lying around to fund article processing charges. So in April of 2008, the NIH public access policy was enacted, which requires all NIH-funded researchers to publish electronic copies of their peer-reviewed manuscripts in the National Library of Medicine's online archive, PubMed Central. Full text of the articles are made publicly available and searchable online in PubMed Central no later than 12 months after publishing in a journal. So, if a researcher receives direct funding from an NIH grant or a contract or an intramural program, or if a researcher is an NIH employee, this policy applies to them. So with this policy in place, if one of your faculty members receives federal funding from the NIH, it's really not an option for them. They're required to make their findings publicly available. So in that instance, open access would not be something that they can just dismiss. So let's move on to Medline, PubMed, and PubMed Central. So if we remember back on that previous slide, the NIH mandate states that research must be deposited in the PubMed Central repository, but is that the same as PubMed? So this is where it gets confusing, especially for students, faculty, researchers. So to fully understand the implications of this public access policy, it really is necessary to explore this relationship between these three resources. So first I'm going to start with Medline. Medline is the National Library of Medicine Journal Citation Database. It started in the 1960s, and currently it provides more than 24 million references to biomedical and life sciences journals all the way back to 1946. There are over 5,600 scholarly journals that Medline is incorporating citations from. One thing that makes Medline stand apart is that one of the benefits of the Medline database is the NIH Chartered Advisory Committee, which reviews and recommends journals to be indexed for Medline. Journals are indexed for Medline typically due to the quality and if they're within the scope of the Medline database. And in addition to the journal selection process, setting Medline apart from PubMed is the added value of that NLM controlled vocabulary, which we all know as MESH, medical subject headings. So Medline is the primary component of PubMed, and it is part of that entrees series of databases provided by the National Center for Biotechnology Information, or NCBI. The majority of publications covered in Medline are scholarly journals. However, there are a small number of newspapers, magazines, and newsletters considered useful to particular segments of NLM, which are also included. So let's move to this slide, and this slide is just a graphic depiction of Medline. This is going to make more sense over the next couple of slides, so just bear with me. So PubMed. PubMed is what you are probably most familiar with as the searching interface when you visit www.pubmed.gov. The term PubMed is often used interchangeably with Medline, but there are some key differences to be aware of. PubMed has been available since 1996. It has more than 28 million references currently, which is 4 million more than Medline. They include a variety of citations, including in-process citations. In-process citations provide records for articles before those records have had the chance to be indexed yet, or so that's what an in-process citation is. PubMed also includes citations to articles that might be out of scope for certain Medline journals. This might be maybe more of a general science or a life science article. There are also ahead of print citations. These are citations that precede the article's final publication in a Medline index journal. And there are also some pre-1966 citations that haven't yet had the chance to be updated with current mesh headings. And another thing that is included in PubMed are PubMed Central citations to author manuscripts from that NIH-funded researchers. So again, PubMed is what you and probably most commonly your researchers are probably the most familiar with as the searching interface when you visit PubMed.gov. And here is the Medline graphic is not so lonely now. It's got its PubMed next to it. And as you can see, notice, there are a lot of areas in PubMed that are in that lighter orange color that would not be indexed for Medline. So finally, we're going to talk about PubMed Central. PubMed Central launched in 2000 as a free archive for full-text biomedical and life science journal articles. It is a repository for journal literature deposited by participating publishers, as well as for author manuscripts submitted in compliance with that NIH public access policy that we discussed earlier. Some PubMed Central journals are also Medline journals. Some PubMed Central content such as book reviews are not cited in PubMed. And there we have this little, all together you see the relationship. While they're working together, they're not the same database, and the takeaway here really is that everything that gets put in PubMed Central is indexed for Medline. However, the takeaway here is not everything deposited into PubMed Central is indexed for Medline. However, most of it will be discoverable in the PubMed database. And I just want to take the time really quick to just acknowledge Annette, who created a version of this logo for her NNLM Mid-Continental Region presentation last year. She had developed this little graphic, and I just think it does just such a good job of kind of explaining the relationship of how these resources work together. Okay, so now that you've seen the relationship between PubMed Central, Medline, and PubMed, let's discuss a couple of problems that can occur with this. So, since the implementation of the NIH public access policy, the PubMed Central database has grown to include more than 3 million full-text articles with over 1 million unique users accessing that database every day. The NIH public access policy effectively addresses the public's growing need for high-quality health information, and it promotes accelerated scientific advancement. However, it also has contributed to a significant number of questionable and potentially predatory open access contributions. So this really is a relevant concern for those of us who work in health sciences and biomedical fields. An additional problem here is that the NIH public access mandate does not state or recommend which journals your research should be published in. What they do is they leave that up to the authors. And because of this, many questionable or predatory journals have exploited this mandate and the requirement that research must be deposited into PubMed Central. And also, not helping out the situation is there really is no official, list of reputable or predatory journals. So those are all things that are kind of contributing to this problem. So now that you have some background information on OA and traditional publishing, I'm going to hand it over to Anna, and she's going to do some live searching to kind of show you some real-world examples of this in action.
Hello?
All right, Anna.
Okay. Okay, so I'm going to begin by doing some live searching of the examples of the resources Carolyn mentioned. And when discussing the relationship between Medline, PubMed, and PubMed Central, one common question is how can one limit one's search results to only articles indexed for Medline? Since, as we learned, the vetting procedures for journals to become indexed for Medline are quite rigorous, often having the status as being, quote-unquote, currently indexed for Medline is a guide for many people to know if a journal is considered safe. PubMed allows you to limit your search to Medline-only citations in a number of ways. First of all, anytime if you see an article that has been indexed with medical subject headings or MESH, that means it is a Medline citation. If you limit your PubMed search results with MESH-controlled vocabulary, you will see only Medline citations in your result list. For instance, the search as we see it here is going to retrieve only Medline citations because I have fluid therapy forcing the search to search for those that have been indexed with MESH. But oftentimes it is not useful or not applicable to use MESH terms when you're searching. However, even if you're performing a keyword search only, you can still restrict to Medline citations by applying certain filters to them if you wish. So I'm going to click out, and it doesn't let me click out, so apologize quickly. Oh, let me take you.
Give me 1 second. I'm going to take control, and then I'll flip you over.
No, that's okay. I've got it. I'm just going to go ahead and, does everyone see my, oh, I'm sorry. Okay, so everyone should see my screen now, and we're going to search for our topic in PubMed. And I'm going to perform a keyword search instead and show you how you can limit to Medline citations only, even if you're doing a keyword search. Over here on the left, you see your filters. You can click on Show Additional Filters, and there's an option for journal categories. So check that if it's not already checked, and click Show. One thing to remember is whenever you're using these filters, when you select one, you have to actually check it. That just brings it to be able to be viewed, so it doesn't happen by default. So now I've checked it. And when I do this, if you'll note, it restricts our citations to Medline only, and what we'll see is the result number goes from 311 down to 284. So this makes sense because remember, any citation that's going to be currently indexed for Medline has undergone all those processing things, such as being read by a subject expert and having it applied indexed with the MESH terms. So this process takes some time. So remember, when you're restricting your search to Medline, you are not going to see the newest citations. So as we see, I've sorted by publication date. And I now want you to note the date of the search results. the newest ones first, which are at the top, if you see the two most recent results are both from January of this year. However, if I clear my filters, meaning I no longer restrict to Medline citations, I once again see the 311 results. And now I see a recent study published in NEJM from June of this month, which is on my topic. So as we can see, it might often be detrimental if you only search by restricting to Medline citations. However, you can always look at the status of any journal for any citation you are looking at in PubMed, and you can do this a number of ways. First, let's stay on this page for a moment, and I want to ask if looking at these search results as you see them, and if you were unfamiliar with these journals, would you be able to tell from this view whether or not these citations are for journals that will be indexed for Medline, meaning they come from journals currently indexed for Medline but are still in process? So I'd like you to put your answer in the chat box, yes or no. Is it evident to someone unfamiliar with the journal titles whether these citations will be indexed for Medline? Looking at this page. And I'm going to give you just a few seconds to put your answer. I can't actually view it so much since I'm out, but we'll talk about that in a little bit.
We're getting several answers for no. If you're since you're not in there.
And that is correct. It used to actually be, if you might recall, there was listed on this view, the brief citation view, that you could see if it was currently indexed for Medline, if it was Medline in process, if it was just the PubMed, meaning it would not be indexed for Medline. Unfortunately, that is no longer available. And if we were to click on a citation, so let's click on number 3. From our abstract view, at this point, we do not see whether or not it will be indexed. Now, this is a new citation. So actually, as a point of fact, this Journal of Clinical Monitoring and Computing, is currently indexed for Medline. However, because it's so new, it takes time for that. And unfortunately, from this view right here, we're still not going to know whether or not it will be indexed, or it will never be indexed, or it's still in process one way or another. But let's talk about how you can certainly find this out. So to answer this question, let's talk a little bit about the NLM Catalog. And I'm going to go back to our PubMed homepage. The NLM Catalog, specifically the subset of journals that make up PubMed, are easily accessible in a number of ways. So remember, this list is going to cover all of Medline, not just those currently indexed for Medline journals. It's also going to include non-Medline journals who have content deposited into PubMed Central and then added to PubMed. These include journals that have been vetted through the PubMed Central journal selection process, but it will also include the author manuscripts that are required under the NIH Public Access Policy that have to be deposited when the research is funded by NIH. So therefore, NLM is creating a catalog record for every journal with at least one full-text article that is cited in PubMed. So what will you find? You're going to find records for Medline journals, which produce substantive index content, as well as records for journals that contribute possibly just a few citations. To access this database, click on the link from the PubMed homepage that says Journals and NCBI Databases. So let's go ahead and look at a journal, JAMA Internal Medicine. I'm going to I have my options of my keyword search I performed, and I'm going to click on the top one. So this is a record for JAMA Internal Medicine. As you can see, the NLM Catalog Record actually gives you a lot of helpful information about the journal. At the top, you'll see who the authoring body is. This is quite helpful when you want to know if the journal is affiliated with an official medical society or association. In this case, it's the AMA. We also can note the official NLM abbreviation. And below that, we'll see where it says continues Archives of Internal Medicine, 1960. This often will allow you to see the previous title of the same journal's publication history, as well as track preceding iterations of that same journal when it's undergone name changes or been bought out by another publisher. Further down, we do see who the publisher is. In this case, it's the AMA. This line can be particularly helpful if you need to determine whether a journal can be possibly questionable or possibly predatory. I also want to draw special attention below all that where it says in here and underneath that, current indexing status. This is where NLM tells you in which other databases and for how long this particular journal is or was indexed. So for instance, we see that this journal is currently indexed for Medline, and we see that it's been so since 2013. If that seems weird to you, remember that this is for JAMA Internal Medicine, and it underwent a name change. If we were to go back to the previous title for Archives of Internal Medicine, we would see that that too was indexed for Medline throughout their run since 1960. Let's look at another example. I'm going to put this one in quotation marks, Journal of Intensive Care, because I will probably get a lot of hits in just making a broad keyword search. Okay, let's look at this record. First of all, what we probably want to know is the current indexing status. This journal is not currently indexed for Medline. However, it has been indexed in PubMed since 2013. Why? Because it has been fully indexed in PMC since then as well. Remember, PubMed Central indexes over 4.5 million records, and most of these are participating journals that have been vetted through the PubMed Central journal selection process. And since 2014, just to let everyone know, PMC did revise their scientific standards and implemented a more rigorous vetting procedure. So just know, just because a journal is not currently indexed for Medline does not necessarily mean it's of low or even questionable quality. It's also important to note that only about 12% of PMC records are those author manuscripts with NIH-funded published research. And most of those articles are going to be published in high-quality journals. So again, there's not a single thing you can look at to determine the necessary, quality or standards of a journal. But the problem will remain that articles that are published in potentially predatory or low-quality journals may slip into PubMed via that NIH public access policy that requires all NIH public-funded research to be accessible via PubMed Central and then gets placed into PubMed. It's also important to note that even vaulted American institutions can get duped by these potentially predatory journals. A study was published just last September 2017 in Nature, and it found of about 1,907 articles published in potentially predatory journals, 15% of those came from the United States. The only country with a greater number of submissions was India. And while about 3/4 of the papers failed to report any funding sources, those that did, the most common listed was the National Institutes of Health. So it's obvious then these NIH-funded articles are eventually going to be archived in PubMed Central and thus indexed into PubMed. And just to also let you know, the scientists and researchers that get duped, these aren't from, middling institutions. They are coming from Harvard, University of Texas, and even the Mayo Clinic. So I want to go back out to PubMed because we've talked about the journals database as a helpful way to know if something's currently indexed for PubMed, currently indexed for Medline, if it's indexed in PubMed, if it's indexed in PubMed Central. But oftentimes when you go to PubMed, you're not going to with a particular journal in mind. You might be coming there with a search in mind. So let's perform a search together. let's say your patron wants you to perform a similar search as this. And you know what? Let me make sure I'm spelling it correctly. Okay. Okay, sorry about the typing problems there. Okay. All right, now we are seeing our result list. So if you're not sure, PubMed does have a box at the top where typically they rank things based on when things are most recently added into PubMed. So that would normally mean newest stuff first. But they do have a box of relevancy ranking often. Let's go ahead and say you're interested in clicking the first one here, the highest one ranked via relevance. So we're looking at the abstract view of an article, and let's just say the topic is on target for what you're looking for, but you look at the journal title, which in this case is the Journal of Tropical Diseases and Public Health. And let's say this journal title is not familiar to you, and you want to know more about it. PubMed lets you go straight to the NLM catalog by simply clicking on the hyperlink of that journal abbreviation and going search in NLM catalog. So here we are in that view for the NLM catalog. Let's go ahead and look at the information that they present. I first want to draw your attention to see where it's indexed. The current indexing status says not currently indexed for Medline. Thhowever, not only does it tell you that, it also tells you that the citations for articles where the manuscript was, these are going to include only citations for articles where the manuscript was deposited in PubMed Central in compliance with public access policies. So this is basically NLM's way of telling you that they're only including this article because they had to under the mandate for the NIH public access policy. This also makes sense because if we go back to the article view, we see it is grant supported by an NIH-funded agency. I want to go back to the record, and I want you to also now take note of the publisher. So the publisher for this journal is the Onyx Publishing Group. Let's go back to our presentation and learn a little bit more about this organization. So I'm going to go through my slides that I've just discussed. Several years ago, Onyx, this widely accepted predatory publishing group, bought a group of high-quality science journals, and among them was the Canadian Journal of General Internal Medicine. And then, in 2016, the Onyx Group had an FTC lawsuit filed against them, alleging the company is deceiving academics and researchers about the nature of its publications and falsely claiming that its journals follow rigorous peer review protocols. In late last year, a federal court granted the FTC's request for an injunction halting the Onyx Group from their deceptive practices of making false claims about their journals and academic conferences and hiding their publishing fees. So now we need to think about what this means for PubMed, since it has records for articles that are published by this group and other possibly predatory or low-quality journals. So unfortunately, what this means is, even though the percentage is very, very, very low, one can no longer say with absolute certainty that everything indexed in PubMed is from a journal, is from a peer-reviewed journal. So unfortunately, there really isn't just one single tool or resource that you can use to gauge the quality of an open access journal. We asked you in the pre-presentation questions, where do you go to evaluate the reliability and quality of a journal? So in our last few slides, we want to share with you some additional tips as well as the resources that are popular among us librarians here as well as our patrons at Mercer. Journal selection tools have emerged in recent years as a way for authors to match keywords from the manuscripts they are working on to journals where they might get published. There are dozens of these journal selection tools. If you did a quick Google search of journal selection or journal matching tools, you will see a lot of these. However, here at Mercer, we typically point our users to the Jane resource, the main reason being that it interfaces directly with PubMed. Jane stands for Journal Author Name Estimator. On the landing page of the Jane resource, most prominently, you will see a large search box. Users can input keywords, manuscript titles, and even full abstracts, and then search for similar journals on their topic. You can see on the right-hand side there is some basic information about how Jane works. Notice that they have included a statement regarding predatory journals. Specifically, they note that since Jane relies on data directly sourced from PubMed, some potentially predatory results can be retrieved. However, if we run a search in Jane of the terms of one of our earlier PubMed searches, we'll see what journals are matched. When you click the Find Journals button, you are taken to a list of journals that Jane has ranked based off of what they refer to as an article influence score. Notice the different color tags next to each journal name. In an effort to combat the threat of potentially predatory journals, Jane offers tags depicting if a journal is Medline indexed, which is indicated in green, if a journal's articles are deposited in PubMed Central, indicated by the blue tag, and if a journal is considered a high-quality open access journal, indicated in orange. Jane considers a journal as high-quality open access if it doesn't charge readers a fee to access. At Mercer, we found that students and junior faculty find this resource particularly helpful when they are just beginning to navigate the publishing world. Another resource that we highly recommend to our users is Journal Citation Reports and Rankings. Journal Citation Reports, or JCR, is the foremost authoritative resource for journal impact factor data. Even though there are many other resources that are very reliable for measuring impact of a journal or journal articles therein, this database is still often seen as the gold standard for measuring impact. The database provides impact factors as well as rankings by specialty of many journals in the social and life sciences based on millions of citations. It offers numerous sorting options, including by impact factor, total sites, total articles, and immediacy index. In addition, JCR provides a 5-year impact factor and visualized trend data. One feature to be aware of with a JCR is the open access filter. You can see this checkbox on the left side of this slide as indicated by the red arrow. This is a great feature to limit results to open access journals, so you and your research can see only those journals if they're interested in publishing one of those. The drawback of JCR is that it is fee-based, and so it is not free. Another resource to be aware of is the Committee on Publication Ethics Principles of Transparency and Best Practice. In 2014, COPE partnered with the Directory of Open Access Journals, DOAJ, Open Access Scholarly Publishers Association, OASPA, and World Association of Medical Editors, WAME, to publish a minimum set of criteria for journals and publishers to be assessed against when they apply for membership at one of their organizations. Since 2014, these criteria have been updated to keep up with the changes to the scholarly publishing landscape. An example of some of the criteria they use include a transparent peer review process, affiliated governing bodies, transparency of an editorial board including their members, and clearly identified mechanisms and policies for handling research misconduct. Again, thank you so much for your time today. Please feel free to reach out to me or Caroline if you have any questions or comments regarding today's presentation, or if you have any general comments about this topic. And here are some of the references we used today. I saw a question earlier in the chat for the one from Nature. I mentioned it in thinking that maybe you could find it, but since you might not, I will have that included as well.
I sent him a link. I sent him a link, Anna, to it.
Oh, thank you so much. Okay. Oh, you did. I see it. Great. Thank you so much.
Okay, so I have been following the chat, and I have a couple questions that I'm pulled from the chat, so I'll go ahead and ask these from the people watching. The first one is, if not indexed, does that mean low quality?
Well, no. First of all, no, it doesn't. Even if it's not indexed in any of these really necessarily. I mean, there are new journals that have rigorous standards they've put in place and rigorous peer review that will take place, that is taking place. If it's very new, often they can't even apply for getting indexed in Medline or PubMed Central. They have to accumulate a number of either years or at least a number of articles that they've published. So no, that does not necessarily mean that. But you just have to have due diligence in looking at the publisher themselves, seeing if they're affiliated with another group of publishers that potentially could be predatory, looking at a number of things. Are they affiliated with an organization, a medical association, a school, those type things. This is a very short, I mean, there's a lot on this topic, and other presentations we've given have looked at other things such as how to evaluate at the article level. So a lot of times if you get a journal and you're really questioning whether or not it's potentially low quality or whatever, look at the articles, read the articles. You know, are there spelling errors? Are they, you know, is it based off of funding? Do they make sure that they know whether or not they received ethics approval? There are certain things that you can just gauge the quality of a journal. You as a librarian, a journal article, you as a librarian, that you may be aware of, that type thing. Look at a few, you know, if you have time. But a lot of times we don't have this, so we want to give our users these resources that can generally help them know where to publish their article, such as Jane and other places like that.
Okay, the next question is, what do the speakers think of NLM collecting and distributing information on journals with at least one article indexed in either Medline, PubMed, or PMC where there is suspicion that the journal is predatory? Should the information about a possibly predatory journal be indicated within the article as well within the NLM Catalog Record?
Well, I mean, I have my personal opinion, but I'll just say right now what they are doing in some ways is this, in that they are telling you, as we saw from that journal, the NLM Catalog Record, that this is not something that they index in any of their resources. They just have to include it because of the NIH mandate. And another, I'll also think that part of the problem is they themselves vetting the journals, which I would love to see that, but I mean, that would be a lot of work. I think more it comes on the librarians to tell our users, hey, don't publish in a journal that's low quality. I mean, it doesn't have to be predatory, it's just low quality, don't publish in it, et cetera. You know, your research, especially if it's NIH funded, should go into a higher quality standard journal. So the part of the problem is when these authors who have received the researchers have received the money, if they get duped and they're publishing in one of these journals, well, they've done the research, and this is the research that's mandated. So it almost then falls on who's responsible for ensuring it's put into a good journal. And I think what PubMed Central has, even part of the problem is if they were to complain, it's almost like the author's like, hey, I published it on their website. They claimed they were peer review. You know, how am I? So it's kind of a tricky situation, and I just think us librarians need to do what we can to prevent it from, you know, happening at our institutions.
Okay, the next question, is Jane for all subjects, humanities as well as science?
It's only going to apply to humanities, unfortunately, when...
Yeah.
Yeah,
sorry,
Carolyn can answer that. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, yeah, no, it's working with PubMed, so unless that journal has been indexed there, it's not going to work with the humanities specialties specifically. And that's one of the reasons why we actually like it, because it works so well with our, you know, our patrons, our group. But as we had mentioned before, if you just go to Google and type in journal selection tools, you will find a lot, and a lot of them will work with other disciplines and specialties. So, yeah.
Okay, are all peer-reviewed journals credible, or can they be predatory, and is there a standard criteria for peer-reviewed?
I'm sorry, what was the question again? Sorry.
I said, are all peer-reviewed journals credible, or can they be predatory, and is there a standard criteria for peer-reviewed?
Okay, so this is, okay. So part of the problem in answering this question is the unknowns, because a journal can say they're peer-reviewed. I mean, this is what these predatory journals do. They point-blank say, we're peer-reviewed, and they don't actually do peer review or quality peer review. So part of the problem is, A, measuring that. Then there can be, there's other issues where it's a very reputable journal for a long time and it gets bought out, as we heard Onyx did for certain journals, gets hijacked, and then the peer review will go down. So I will say Medline, NLM is doing what they can to combat certain things, because I don't know if you are aware, but they even removed a journal from currently indexed for Medline. This is Medline, not even PubMed Central. Medline removed a journal. I think it was Oncogene. But in any case, you know, there are ways to kind of go back through a journal after it's been out for a while, even if it's currently indexed for Medline or PubMed Central, and determine, do they still have these high standards for publishing. And honestly, what a lot of that just comes down to is having subject experts, scientists, librarians, read articles and vet those. What are they publishing? Are they applying standards, editorial as well as scientific, to articles? So in some ways, I like to tell librarians that sometimes you might have to do that yourself, but that's maybe another topic for another day. But yeah, just saying something's peer-reviewed doesn't necessarily mean they do peer review. I would say if they're doing quality peer review by, you know, outside subject experts, you know, that's kind of the hallmark of scientific information. So yeah, it's just an odd topic. Tricky.
And I would just to follow up, I would say if you go to a journal site, to me, I just want them to be transparent. I want to know, like, how does that peer review process work? And quality journals will go into detail about, you know, editor 1 gets it for these 2 weeks, and then it gets passed along to this person. And then, like, they'll be very, like, transparent about, like, well, who are those editors? And, like, if it's someone in a, you know, a certain discipline, are they appropriate to be there? So to kind of answer your question, no, there's not just like one definition of what a quality peer review is, but again, you're going to kind of have to do some research to, even before you submit to a journal, if it's, you know, appropriate or not.
Okay, so we have time for one more question, and it is it possible to publish directly to PMC and skip publishing elsewhere?
Yes. Well, what that means is, you know, there's still an independent editor-in-chief, editorial board, all that good stuff. You're still a publisher, but you can negotiate it, I think. Well, do you mean you won't even publish it on your own website? Is that what you're talking about? There are a lot of online journals that just, they publish in PubMed Central. That's their main, source of dissemination, and they're not indexed anywhere else. But I don't know that they might still have their own website. I think they would have to. Yeah, they would have to, because they won't even get observed unless they are already publishing online.
Okay. Well, I want to thank everyone for attending today's presentation. As a reminder, today's presentation was recorded and will be posted on the NLM YouTube page as soon as possible, usually within a week. I encourage you to subscribe to this page as you will be notified as new recordings are made available. And I'm going to go ahead and paste the link for this in the chat box. Please check out the SEA website for the list of our upcoming webinars. And here is the link for the evaluation survey. I will also be sending out an email to everyone who attended to evaluate today's webinar and to receive your MLA CE credit. After you've completed the evaluation, you will receive instructions on how to claim the credits through MedLib Ed website. Again, thank you everyone for attending today's webinar, and thank you Anna and Carol Ann for your time to present today's webinar, and everyone have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.